Hello, audience. My name is Dr. Ronda Marie Chakolis, and I am here today on For Your Health. We're going to keep this topic in alignment with being healthy. We're going to talk about families. And before we get started, I need to let everybody know the views and opinions are represent our panel members and not necessarily the agencies that they're affiliated with. And so this is so exciting to have you all here. Um, I have two wonderful people from Ramsey County, Trish Skophammer and Guy Bowling. What I'm going to do is let you introduce yourself. Trish, you can go first.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you so much for having us, Dr. Chakolis. I'm Trish Skophammer. I am the Director of Child Support Services in Ramsey County. I've been working in Ramsey County Child Support for 27 years this month, and there's been just a lot of changes, and we're excited to come and talk about how child support's evolving.
Alrighty. My name is Guy Bowling. I currently work in Ramsey County as part of the leadership team as a planning specialist with a specific focus on outreach and community engagement. Previous to that, I worked in the community on behalf of fathers for almost 30 years as part of the fatherhood movement in the field of family support. And just happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So, as listeners can tell, the topic is child support.
Right.
And child support a lot of times can evoke a very strong emotional response. A lot of us don't know the history and how it started. Trish, would you mind telling us a little bit about the history of child support?
Yes, absolutely. So, child support has been around for a very long time, but the child support program as we know it today started in 1974, and it was really meant to be a reimbursement program to reimburse the AFDC dollars that were being spent. And there was this sort of picture of fathers deserting their families. They were called absent fathers back then, deserting their families, and mothers who needed support for their children after the fathers had deserted them and they were on the AFDC program. And that was really the focus, was enforcement, bringing out the hammer, doing everything that we can do to collect child support, and then use those collections to reimburse the government for the AFDC program. So it doesn't quite look like that anymore, but that was how it started.
Yeah. And so, Guy, would you mind telling me like what your experience is with child support and maybe how you've come to see it evolve over the last few decades?
Wow, how much time we got? My experience have on a personal level. Um, I was a father who paid child support for my daughter after her mother and I got divorced. And that was my introduction to paying child support. And though initially I didn't know how it worked, I didn't understand how it worked, I didn't know how to calculate it in terms of how much you pay. So it was all confusing and complicated and pretty difficult to manage
Mhm.
as it relates to um, just being in a position financially to be able to even contribute when it's like, well, wait a second. I'm already covering certain expenses. I've already been doing this, but now somebody's connected to me, telling me when and where and what, and I'm going to withhold your income regardless if you like it or not. And some of the amounts that I was chargeable initially established, it was considerably high related to what my expenses were and what I had been paying. But I had to learn what my responsibility was to fulfill that financial obligation. But I think in terms of what I know, also in the work that I do, that there's a lot of men who are in position that want to pay, but need the resources to pay, and also have already paid and contributed to their expenses of their children, and just didn't have an understanding of how the system works. Because if mom goes and gets resources, and then there's an understanding automatically, as Trish was saying, that they're expected to pay as a result of that. But I've also learned in the many years I've been doing the work that a lot of the men, particularly the low income men, are expected to pay and they don't have the ability to pay. So they need the resources to be able to do that. And then also, too, is that when something changes as it relates to their situations, they can work with child support to get some flexibility and get some reasonable support to be able to make the payment. So for me, I mean, it's evolved in a way that I now see child support not so much of grabbing you by the ankles and turning you upside down and shaking change out of your pocket, but they're willing to work with you and provide that flexibility if you're unable to pay, but also hold you accountable too.
So we talked about it evolving, right? We
Hmm.
talked about it being this reimbursement program. How has it evolved? Um,
Yeah.
in particular in the last year, I think you have some information you want to share
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. Well, first I want to comment on Guy like holding people upside down and shaking them. I mean, I've seen court hearings where people have literally been told to empty their pockets, and they've got, $4.35, turn that over. Um, but I think particularly in the state of Minnesota, which is a pretty progressive state, and in Ramsey County, we've done some recent things. We've proposed, successfully had put into law legislation that stops interest charging. So when somebody's got past due child support, they don't have interest accruing on that anymore. We have a really robust arrears forgiveness program where we forgive child support debt when it's owed to the state. We don't have the authority to forgive it if it's owed to the other parent, but we do when it's owed to the state. We've forgiven millions of dollars when people don't have the ability to pay. Because one thing that we do know is that when a person, usually a father, is strapped with child support debt, it has an impact on their mental health, and it drives a wedge between them and their children, and them and their family. And that's not good for anybody. That's certainly not the goal of the program. We're very cautious about how we do things to collect child support. So, as you probably are aware, child support has some really powerful tools like credit bureau reporting, driver's license suspension, taking tax returns, things like that. And sometimes doing those things is helpful to the family because it gets the child support to the kids who need it. But there are times when those things cause harm to families. I actually don't know that credit bureau reporting ever has anything positive. I don't think that helps us get payments. Again, that's my opinion, but um, it causes a lot of harm because then how is this person, and often the father, we know that 85, be somewhere between 80 and 85% of the people who owe child support are fathers. So we're really talking about fathers. You report them to the credit bureau, then they can't get housing, or they can't get a vehicle, or they can't get a job in some situations. So I think child support really has to be cautious to make sure that the things we're doing are helping the financial stability of the entire family. And we don't do that very well when we hurt one parent under the sort of auspices of, this is good for the family. And that's really true with driver's license suspension. I think my eyes were really open to driver's license suspension when years back somebody called me, a mother who was receiving child support called me and said, "Why did you suspend his driver's license?" And I was, kind of high and mighty. Well, that's what we do. He hadn't paid. That's how our system is set up. We take their driver's license. And she says, "Well, he picks the kids up from school every day. And now he can't do that. I know he's not paying support. I know he should be, but I really needed him to be picking up the kids from school. And then he couldn't do that until we got that straightened out." And that was really eye-opening for me because first it let me know that we need to listen to the parents. They should have some input into how we handle their case. And we should have a better understanding of what their circumstances are before we decide what's the right thing to do in any given case to make sure that the kids' needs are being met. But again, doing so in a way that doesn't bring financial devastation to the father.
Absolutely. Guy, so you kind of shared your personal experience, how you said child support was adversarial. Um, and it really, took an impact on you. Can you tell me how that has evolved for you? And then kind of talk about this thing that we always hear in Minnesota, that Minnesota is a woman's state.
I think on a personal level, it helped me better understand how it's set up for some of the things that Trish already described. But also, I think it gave me an understanding and a realization about what my financial contribution is to my child, right? And what I was responsible for. And also the benefits, as a matter of fact, because it was able to help me begin to coordinate those things that maybe if me and mom couldn't figure out how that actually works and who's responsible for what, you're able to get a better understanding on how it's also calculated and then get a sense of what it could be, what it should be, and what you actually do. And I think that helps you in terms of how you budget. That helps you really begin to understand how you're managing your finances as well as what it actually costs to raise a child, because we all know it's not it's not cheap. But I think the other thing is that, for where I am today, I understand the role that I play. I understand the responsibility that I have, but also understand the expectation in terms of child support itself. The system is really there to not harm the entire family. It may come across that way, and that's the perception of it. And the child support being, and well, Minnesota being a woman's state, I hear that all the time. But I think that's because of lack of knowledge and education and understanding. And it could appear that way for folks because they don't always know to where to find resources, who can actually help them, who has helped them. And they only go by their own personal experiences that they have within the system itself. And so automatically they assume that if I had some challenges here within this part of the system is against me, and it seems as if the folks I come in contact with, and if it's child support, which we know there's a high percentage of child support workers are female, they automatically make that assumptions. Well, she automatically doesn't care about my situation. She's here to support the mom. There's resources available that I'm not aware of for men. So if I don't know about that, I automatically assume I'm set up to failure. And it seems like a lot of times too, particularly how guys get involved in paying child support, usually through public assistance. And usually they open up public assistance for mom and she gets all these resources. And the guy is usually probably, if he had custody of the child himself, he probably would be eligible because, his income and what his ability is to be able to earn a living. But at the same time, it provides a resource and provides him with debt. So part of that is like, I just haven't seen the benefits to me being connected in any kind of way because I don't feel like they're supporting me. So that's the perception. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the reality.
So, Trish, how do we start shifting this reality? And I mean, feel free to comment on your personal experience.
Mhm.
I certainly will interject and share mine. But again, part of my show here is like we inform, but we want to build capacity
Mhm.
so that we can help people get the resources and access to the information that they need. So,
Yes. Yeah. Well, I can share that I have had a child support case, a couple of child support cases actually, because I've raised children. I've also raised grandchildren, and have been a receiver of child support, but never a payer. Like, guys experience that. And I can say from my experience, I was confused too. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand. Things were happening without them being explained to me. Things were moving forward, and I went through. A situation where I had two different child support orders and I didn't know why. And which one was, how much am I supposed to be getting? I didn't know what that was all about. So it's always been really important to me to try to do a better job of just providing customer service in general, even if the program is what it is, which, it doesn't have to be. That's a whole nother thing. But just to make sure that we're doing a good job of answering the phone and talking to people and explaining things to people. Um, I think one of the things I think that's important to know too is that there are parts of the program that people just don't understand, and we don't do a good job of getting the word out, not just to the people in our system, but just to the community in general. And that's one of the reasons we're so happy to be here today. Um, but I'll share one story. I had child support owed to me, a pretty substantial amount of child support owed to me from my former husband. And he had, one of the reasons we got divorced is he had started to get into some trouble, and I didn't want to be around that. And he ended up going to prison a couple of different times and just always had a really hard time staying out of trouble, staying employed, being able to take care of his child support obligations was the last thing on his list. The first thing on his list was probably, what am I going to eat today? Where am I going to live? He just wasn't in a place where he could pay child support. And because I worked in the system, I knew that I could forgive the debt that he owed me. I didn't need to make him pay that back to me. I was able to forgive that. And I think a lot of mothers in that same situation, they would do the same thing if we'd let them know that was an option. So there's just so much that we can tell people that we need to just get out there and do so that people know we don't have to be adversarial. We can have parents, and we do have parents all the time that care about each other. Even if their marriage didn't work out, they still care about that as the other parent of their child. They understand their challenges and they don't want to make life worse for them. That's not what they're interested in doing. That's the father of your child or the mother of your child. You want to be in a cooperative way with each other. And we don't want to come in there as a child support program, as a government system, and say, no, you have to be adversarial. That doesn't help families.
right. And so, Guy, would you care to say, like, how do you get this information to men? Because a lot of times, again, we perpetuate negative things like, oh my gosh, she hit me for this, or this has been my experience with the worker. They're out to get me, kind of some of those things that you said. Where can men go to get the information that they need?
Oftentimes, they're not even seeking that information until they're impacted by it, right? So until something has impacted their ability to function. So child support in general says, well, I'm working this job. Next thing I know, I didn't put in all these hours, and I look up and they didn't took this much money from my check. And like, I don't even know how they calculate that. I don't even know how they found me. I don't even know how that ended up being the case. And so for them, they don't even know what to do initially. And then what ends up happening is then they start talking to friends or they start talking to family members. And some of them will have the same thing we were talking about earlier, just, well, it's this type of state and they're only out to get you and there's not too much you can do. And a lot of times they go under the table, right? And they'll start making money in other ways and they won't pay. Or they'll just take jobs and then they'll quit jobs. They'll do that. So they'll work a job just long enough to get a couple of paychecks, and then next thing you know they'll quit and they'll find another job. So they'll play the cat and mouse game. But the way to get it to them, and my particular opinion is that I think child support has a role in terms of getting that information to them from the moment the case is open and when they initially connect with them, because you have a system that sends them out information, and next thing you know, this open, then they. If they open up their mail and pay attention to that and then call and begin to ask questions. So that's one way. And I think the other way is that, you got a number of different programs that are working directly with men on other things, because fathers are dealing usually not only with child support situations, they're dealing with all kind of stuff from housing, substance abuse, anger management, relationship, no frame of reference in terms of a father that they grew up with or not. And then oftentimes they're looking for employment. And so you have to be able to introduce that information to them early on and educate them about how it works. In my personal opinion, I was a teen dad, right? So what do I know about child support at 15, 16 years old? But had I got some pre-education early on or that information or somebody to walk me through the steps to say, hey, potentially this could be coming, that would have been advantageous to me and beneficial to me. So I think that introduce them to the information, intervening when it's time, and then also walking them through how to navigate the system, and finding those resources, because there's a number of different programs out here available to do that. And also, too, collaborating with child support itself to be able to come in and not only educate the folks that are experiencing the difficulties or the challenges with child support, but continuously training and educating their staff so they know exactly what to do, even if they're not the experts, but they know who to call, they know who to connect with to get the information. Because 9 times out of 10, what I've experienced personally as well as professionally, these men do not have a problem paying child support. They really, truly don't, right? Put them in a position, right, to have a decent, livable wage that they're earning, income, opportunities to even be on a career path. And I think the other piece that we don't oftentimes are able to address, unless we got a connection with somebody who has the resources, is help me see my kid, help me spend time with my kid, because the majority of them, the motivation that they got to take care of their kid is because they got a relationship with their kid. And oftentimes it creates a adversarial relationship between them and mom. And next thing you know, they go back and forth, can't see the kid. We were once getting along because, when the baby first comes, as we all know that our parents initially, in most situations, it is all good. Everybody's all in love and everything's going on. But technically, that's not the situation down the road when it goes sour.
Yeah. So there's some themes that I'm hearing. One in particular is that the system was set up with the notion of fathers being absent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I look at how I grew up. I look the neighborhoods I lived in, far from the truth, right? So I think there's a lot of power in that language when we're saying by default we have a system that's set up that says fathers are not going to be present.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a responsibility as a community to change that,
Mhm.
to work on that. And there are ways that you can probably show up for your kids. The example you gave about the father who was picking up the kids from school every day. I think a lot of times, and just my experience, it's the same thing with in healthcare. A lot of times when people hear something negative, they will perpetuate that negative stereotype.
Mhm.
I think we're in a wonderful opportunity, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but where are some concrete places people can go? In particular, I know you represent or you're affiliated with Ramsey County. Where can people go?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one thing they can do is I'm happy to share my contact information. People can call me. One of the things that Guy's working on is community outreach. So we're going to be out in the community at different events as much as we can be. And so, look for us in some of the community events, and we'd be happy to explain things. Um, I think b- other agencies that provide services, like some of the fatherhood programs, we've got a presence with Ujama Place. We've got a presence with Father Project, some of those kinds of places. So wherever men may be receiving services, and hopefully they're connected somewhere, ask, do you know anyone from child support that we could talk to? And I think, actually talking to people who work in the program, who are interested in that, can provide good information and not just rely on the word of mouth that they're hearing from their friends and things.
Yeah, so definitely as part of this, we can put contact information
Yes.
in the video because I think that is really helpful. But one of the reasons I brought you here was like the changes. What are some of those concrete changes that have come up in the last year?
Yeah, so I think some of the things that I'm most excited about, first of all, is hiring Guy to come and work with us, so that he can help us really do that community outreach and that engagement and show up in places and be that educator, and not just in places where fathers are, but also mothers and then different service providers that work with them. But I think that, some of the big ones that I would want to highlight, and I mentioned earlier, we no longer charge interest on past due support. We don't do credit bureau reporting in Ramsey County anymore. It's not a tool that we think is useful. We don't automatically suspend driver's licenses when someone falls behind on their child support payment. We want to talk to both parents and find out if it's something that would cause more harm than good. Those are some of the most positive changes that I can see. And one change is not within the last year, it's actually been in the last 10 years, and I'm excited about this too. 10 years ago, we put in place a customer service phone system, where we don't use receptionists. It's not a call center, but we have actual caseworkers that answer the phone live all all week long during business hours. So when you're not going to have to play phone tag and get in touch with somebody, and you're not going to just have to leave a message and wait for a call back or talk to someone who says, I don't know how to help you. And I think that makes a big difference too, is just getting that information out.
Mm-hmm. And also, too, I'm thinking being collaborative in nature. One of the things that we've done over the years, too, is having an actual live person in the office that's working with some of the partnerships so they're available to be able to answer a lot of those questions. Because when you begin to humanize one another, it doesn't seem so punitive, and so putting child support workers in places where the folks are, where they can come and talk and sit down and work through their case or get some help in working through their case. And then vice versa, because the child support worker also can see the individual that they're working with and humanize them. I think it goes both ways. And so if you can come together in terms of just having a presence in some of these spaces and not only them coming to your place, but you going to their place and being available, I think that humanizes. And I think the compliance is much easier, especially if you're also able to address, particularly I'm talking about fathers, address some of the other issues that they're dealing with, supporting them in that, finding a resource, or at least coming across as if it does matter, you do care. You might not have be in position to be able to help yourself individually, but you can connect them with that resource. And if you do that, they're more likely to be in compliance and fulfill that obligation financially.
Well, and I think one thing too to add to that is, I think it has to be a two-way street. It isn't just about us providing information and educating the public or the people on our caseload, but also listening, to people when they have an issue or a complaint, or they want to give us some feedback about how something impacted them and their family. I think that's really important too, to open that two-way street for listening. So we've done opportunities where we just sit and listen to folks who've been impacted, and we welcome opportunities like that as well.
So, if I were safe to say, it seems like child support has shifted from this adversarial kind of thing to more of a person centered or family centered approach, where you're kind of taking the unique needs of the father or the family and kind of building the case around that and kind of connecting things with resources. Is that the approach you
Yes,
would
yeah,
take?
and we talk about it in terms of it being family-centered child support. I think we're in the very early stages. I think we're still learning how to do family-centered child support, and I think we have a lot to learn and a long ways to go. So I wouldn't come out and say we've got it all figured out, we know what we're doing, but we want to keep learning and we want to keep doing it better and really be focused on the best needs of the entire family.
And I think the important part of that is how do you outside of a campaign, how do you message that, right? How do you get that to the community? Because they have their experiences, they know what they know. And so when you ask Dr. Chakolis about the changes, that's happening in terms of new ways and a new approach, even though we know that internally in terms of things that are going on, because it comes all the way from the top into now being implemented in the community, how do you message that community so they know what you're trying to do? And the only way you can do that is by trusted individuals who already have a connection in that community to share with them because they can vouch vouch for them, and you can end up actually vouching for one another. So you got to have that message. It got to be positive. It got to be informational, and folks got to be educational about what's going on, because if they're already coming in with a negative perception, a negative experience, they might not be so trusting initially. So you have to have somebody to message that in a way that they can see the benefits. So you have to do that. So you have to have those relationships in the community.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think so. This isn't really a direct response to your question, but one of the things that goes back to earlier question you talked about it being considered a mother state. Um, I know a lot of that comes out of if somebody's going through a divorce and the mother ends up getting custody and the father doesn't feel like they really got a chance. But another piece of education that we think is really important is when a young couple is at the hospital and they're having their baby, and you talked earlier like everybody's happy, everybody's in love, whether or not that is going to continue or not. Um, and people sign what's called the recognition of parentage and thinking they're signing the birth certificate. And what young men don't often realize is that by signing that, they've just signed something that says they are indeed the legal father of that child. They're the biological father of the child. And that opens the door for them to be um, uh, having a child support obligation set, but it doesn't open the door for them to have any parenting time or access to their child. That would take a whole different legal action, which we don't do in child support once that recognition has been signed. So then you have these young fathers who think they're doing the right thing by signing that paperwork in the hospital, and oftentimes that is the right thing. But what I'm not sure that they're as aware of is that that doesn't give them parenting time. And so if the couple splits up later, and the moms sometimes act as gatekeepers and keep the fathers away from their children, they would have to go in and do a new legal action. So then when you hear about fathers that say, well, I never get to see my child, all I am is a paycheck, I want to be more than that, we're sometimes left in a position where we can't help you. We can refer you to different legal resources, but we can't necessarily help you with that. So trying to get just more information out all the time in any way we can so people understand their rights and they understand how child support can actually help, so that when you do come into our system, we can help you with parenting time, because we're doing a whole paternity process or a legal parenthood process versus just reacting to somebody who signed paperwork in the hospital. Really different, and it's really gets in the weeds to try to explain the difference, but it's important for, I think, young men to understand that.
But I
So,
think,
okay, go
but
ahead.
I think is that that's important that you were saying, because if you're trying to get in front of it, and this baby's here, right? Paternity ultimately may be established, or it may be established by signing the recognition of parentage. You have to understand why those fathers are signing that in the first place, right? And why they don't realize that now you have a legal responsibility as a result of signing it. They don't give you access to anything, but in their minds, they're thinking from their own frame of reference, their own families, their own communities. Well, I don't even know who my father is myself. I want to make sure that I'm on record as a father. So if somebody's putting this in my face and I'm going through all these emotions of being a father or being a parent, like any of us, you're happy, you're excited, you start thinking about the joys of parenting, and even the fear and the hopes that, the kids turn a certain way. So one of the things that happens if nobody's educating you, informing you on what to do, you think, well, one of the first things I need to do is make sure my name is on this, right? But don't understand what the ramifications are if they're not signing it and they're not really establishing their paternity in a way that will give them access down the road. So part of the reason is to look at why they're doing it in the first place and giving that education, not just to them and programs that would work with them, but also to the staff at the hospitals so they know or have videos or have information to say, hey, before you sign anything, make sure you're signing for these reasons. And this will put you on the hook financially to be obligated to pay this. And once you sign it, it doesn't matter, father or not, you're on the hook for a minute. It takes a minute to undo. So educating them and informing them that before you sign it, you should know what you're signing. But who does that in the moment of this joy, this baby, you believe it's yours? Because oftentimes it goes into, I believe it's my baby. She told me it was my baby. We did have intimacy. So you don't think about all of it at that time.
Very valid point. My last question is really talked about these changes. How do you know that they've been affected? Has there been research done? Has there been data that's collected? And how do you foresee that being used going forward?
Yeah, so I think we are doing a much better job than we ever used to in terms of collecting data, analyzing that data, and using that to help inform us. So one thing that we do know is that drivers, for example, driver's license being suspended, it might have a short-term impact on getting more money in the door, but that impact doesn't stay. It doesn't end up being a long-term impact. We know that when child support orders are set at a reasonable price that a person can afford, our data tells us that that person is more likely to be a long-term payer, where if it's set too high, they're more likely to either quit their jobs, quit paying, go under the table, work for cash. We have data that tells us that um, children who receive child support do better in life in many, many ways. And also data that tells us that when men pay child support, they're more likely to be a part of that child's life. So there's a lot of research out there that tells us that we should be a family-centered program because we're going to have better outcomes across the board when we do.
Guy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about there's an emotional benefit, I believe, for a child and parents, particularly when you are paying, because there's a sense of pride. Because I think oftentimes men feel like, society says if I'm not financially providing for my child, then I'm nothing, right? And if I can't afford to pay this, I'm nothing. So I tend to stay away or may stay away or may have some anxiety about, anything that I can do about it. So I think there's emotional benefits that once you're contributing, you feel a sense of pride in terms of your paying, and if it's reasonable, right? And definitely compared to what you're actually making, and if it's something that is affordable to you, I think there's a sense of pride to know that I do pay, and that I got a system in place where I don't have to manage it out of my own pocket. It's already being managed for me. So anytime you got that kind of opportunity to be able to do that, you take full advantage of it. But I think there's a sense of pride to say I'm contributing to my child, and I got a record of it. I got a record of it, particularly if we're no longer in that relationship. I just think there's huge emotional benefits to it.
Yeah, and I hear that too. That's something that we hear from dads sometimes is that they feel good when they get in a situation where they can pay and the amount that they're supposed to pay is something they can afford. They'll tell us that they feel good about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hearing the concepts of family centered. There are options, in particular, as it relates to the state, where there's forgiveness, there's
Mm-hmm.
an opportunity for healing, there's an opportunity to build capacity and one really just strengthen the family unit. Do either of you have any final comments? This has been very informative
Mm.
for me. I've learned things that I didn't know today, so that was very helpful. Any final comments that you'd like to share?
I just want fathers to know and understand that the system understand there's some limitations, right? But also they're willing to work with you if you're willing to work with them, and that starts with just understanding how it works, right? And having a conversation with the folks who work within the system, and if you're part of the system, and how they would be able to reasonably work with you to have something that can support what you're doing. And I think then the other thing is just there's just long term benefits to that, but also think there builds a confidence within the system. I think it allows you to then say if you have a positive experience, you're going to share that, because right now, child support, and I'm learning this now being a part of the system now. It's like they're a big bad wolf, boogeyman, all those stereotypes that you hear about, but there are also some positive things that come about as a result of it. And I think in terms of arrearages, I think a lot of these guys, if you got a program within the system itself that says we're willing to work with you, well, you can even work with the parent of your child if it's not a public assistance situation and sold to her and not the state. You can work with her to do that if she's willing to, right? But the other thing is that, because a lot of times those guys who have those arrearages, they're never going to be able to pay that off. They never will be able to pay that off. So if you got an opportunity to be able to forgive that debt, particularly if it's owed to the state, that's just a way to put somebody in a position, especially if we're talking about building wealth. So I think that's part of just needs to be heard and need to be said, and community needs to be formed about that you can work with them to get those rearages taken away.
Mhm. And I think the one thing that I would say is talk to us, reach out. I'll give my phone number. People can call me. I'm happy to talk to people. If I can do anything to help them, I will. If I can't, I'll tell them and try to direct them to somebody or some place that can help them.
Well, Trish and Guy, thank you so much for being here
Yeah.
and
Thank you.
being informative. Again, this is part of what we've been doing here as part of the 90th year with the Spokesman-Recorder, which is fabulous and phenomenal. So thank you for sitting in this space with me.
Absolutely.
Again, I am Dr. Ronda Marie Chakolis, and this has been For Your Health. Thank you.